Section 3. 11.
Cultural relativism is a form of moral relativism that asserts all ethical truth is relative to a specific culture. According to cultural relativism, it is never true to say simply that a certain kind of behavior is right or wrong. Rather, it can only ever be true that a certain kind of behavior is right or wrong within a specific society. The strength of cultural relativism is that it allows us to value our moral intuitions without having to be judgmental about other societies that do not share those intuitions. If we reject cultural relativism, then we face the difficulty of having to condemn past societies that did not conform to our modern moral code and present societies that do not already accept it. At a time when tolerance is seen as an important value, cultural relativism certainly seems to be an attractive option. This strength of cultural relativism, however, is also its weakness. Cultural relativism excuses us from judging the moral status of other cultures when doing so seems inappropriate. But it also renders us powerless to judge the moral status of other cultures when doing so seems to be necessary. For example, faced with a culture that deems slavery morally acceptable, we need to judge that society to be morally inferior to our own, for the people who are suffering under the unjust system are in need of being rescued. In order to make such a judgment, we need a cross-cultural moral standard, which is precisely the kind of moral standard that cultural relativism claims does not exist.
Twelve.
One of the techniques, regulatory modes of power, knowledge, cited by Michel Foucault, a French philosopher associated with the structuralist and post-structuralist movements, was the panopticon, an architectural design put forth by Jeremy Bentham in the late 18th century for prisons, insane asylums, schools, hospitals, and factories. Instead of using violent methods, such as torture, the progressive and modern democratic state needed a different sort of system to regulate its citizens. The panopticon offered a powerful and sophisticated form of internalized coercion, which was achieved through the constant observation of prisoners, each separated from the others, allowing no interaction or no communication. This modern structure would allow guards to continually see inside each cell from their vantage point in a high central tower, unseen by the prisoners. Constant observation would act as a control mechanism, a consciousness of constant surveillance that would be internalized. The panopticon was a metaphor that allowed Foucault to explore 1. The relationship between systems of social control and people in a disciplinary situation, and 2. The power-knowledge concept. In his view, power and knowledge come from observing others. It marked the transition to a disciplinary power with every movement supervised and all events recorded. The result of this surveillance is acceptance of regulations and docility, a normalization of sorts stemming from the threat of discipline. Suitable behavior is achieved not through total surveillance, but by panoptic discipline and inducing a population to conform by the internalization of this reality. The actions of the observer are based upon this monitoring and the behaviors he sees exhibited. The more one observes, the more powerful one becomes. The power comes from the knowledge the observer has accumulated from his observations of actions in a circular fashion, with knowledge and power reinforcing each other. Foucault says that by being combined and generalized, they attained a level at which the formation of knowledge and the increase in power regularly reinforce one another in a circular process.
13.
Ageism occurs across the human lifespan and is not limited to any particular age group. In fact, age is one of the first characteristics we notice about other people, whether they are young or old. From a person's perceived age, we make assumptions about their competencies, beliefs, and abilities. For example, we may consider an older job applicant to be unsuitable because we imagine he or she will be forgetful, slow, or of poor health. We see young people in the street and associate them with antisocial behaviors. Ageism is the one prejudice that we all experience, regardless of our race, ethnicity, and gender. The most widespread occurrence of ageism is that which is directed towards older adults. Think of all the over-the-hill jokes made as people approach middle age. It is this implicit nature of negative attitudes towards old age that makes ageism so insidious and difficult to counter. Furthermore, society tends to highlight exceptions to the commonly held stereotypes. Consider how frequently the media reports on exceptional older adults, such as the astronaut John Glenn or the woman who first climbed Mount Rainier at age 77. Given that we are all aging, ageism encompasses the inner fear that many of us have of our own aging. Because humans tend to blend their personal and public attitudes, studying and understanding ageism is particularly complex and challenging. Accordingly, professionals need to become aware of their own ageism when studying and working with older adults.
A. The social state is at once so natural, so necessary, and so habitual to man that, except in some unusual circumstances or by an effort of voluntary abstraction, he never conceives himself otherwise than as a member of a body. Now, society between human beings is manifestly impossible on any other footing than that the interests of all are to be consulted. In this way, people grow up unable to conceive as possible to them a state of total disregard of other people's interests. They are also familiar with the fact of cooperating with others and proposing to themselves a collective, not an individual interest, as the aim, at least for the time being, of their actions. So long as they are cooperating, their ends are identified with those of others. There is at least a temporary feeling that the interests of others are their own interests. B. The annual revenue of every society is always precisely equal to the exchangeable value of the whole annual produce of its industry, or rather, is precisely the same thing with that exchangeable value. As every individual, therefore, endeavors as much as he can, both to employ his capital in the support of domestic industry, and so to direct that industry that its produce may be of the greatest value, every individual necessarily labors to render the annual revenue of the society as great as he can. He generally, indeed, neither intends to promote the public interest nor knows how much he is promoting it. By preferring the support of domestic to that of foreign industry, he intends only his own security. And by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, he intends only his own gain. And he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. The primarily Islamic tradition of females covering themselves from head to foot with a burqa is an example of the intrinsic difficulty in evaluating the extent to which cultural practices promote individual autonomy. Critics of the burqa and similar garments, especially critics from Western cultures, deem them physically oppressive with the weight of the fabric, psychologically oppressive in that they seem to make women devoid of distinctiveness, and emotionally oppressive in that they are yet another manifestation of a male-dominated society in which women are subordinate. According to this view, the tradition of wearing such clothing is unjustified because it greatly restricts the autonomy of women. Defenders of this practice, however, argue the opposite view. They insist that coverings like the burqa actually foster autonomy and liberate women for a number of reasons. For example, a burqa prevents women from being viewed as sexual objects. It encourages unity among female Muslims, and it promotes the appearance of holiness. Proponents of the burqa also ask questions of Western critics which force them to examine their own clothing culture, such as, why is it considered oppressive to wear a headscarf but liberating to wear a miniskirt? They insist the answer lies in the assumptions each culture makes about the women involved and their ability to make choices. They say that if the assumptions are wrong, and the wearing of the burqa and its variants is actually a matter of personal preference, then it is completely justified as a legitimate expression of individual autonomy.